So after a very, very long wait, I am very happy to announce that the Record-ology official 45 adapter is ready for purchase. We are turning up our very own eBay store. It's actually live now, so you can click on the link down below to go ahead and check that out. These will be available in a variety of colors. Each one is a limited edition because once that supply of PLA runs out, we're going to move on to different colors and things and make it sort of collectible. So we've got a couple versions that are up and available for sale right now. So check that out. Again, link down below. These are 3D printed by me and hand finished. The original design was actually created by a viewer and then slightly modified, and it's really, really cool. It's play tested on a variety of turntables, and the price is good too. So support the channel, buy yourself a Record-ology 45 adapter. It's going to be a lot of fun, you guys. In fact, go ahead and buy 2 while you're at it. Hey everybody, welcome back to Record-ology. This is going to be awesome. Have you ever wondered how to go about upgrading or changing out the cartridge on your turntable? Sounds like it might be complicated, tedious, a little bit tedious. It's not too complicated. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do it easily and effectively and correctly. You're not going to want to miss this.
Welcome to Record-ology.
So one of the best aspects of owning a turntable is that you can upgrade, you can customize, you can mod, and that is what we are going to do today. We're just going to do a simple swap out or an upgrade of the cartridge, which is a quick way to sort of customize the sound because every phono cartridge is going to sound unique. So if you find one you like, you want to try an upgrade, etc., this is how you are going to go about doing that. You do need a couple of tools of the trade, and I want to show you what those are. At a minimum, you are going to need a screwdriver, and it's either going to be a flathead in all likelihood or an Allen key or an Allen wrench of some kind. Oftentimes when you buy a new phono cartridge, they will come with the appropriate tool. I like this one because it's like proportionately correct for a flathead screwdriver on a much smaller level. But you will need this at a minimum. You can't do it with just your hands. That would not work. And you don't need to wear gloves. That's just what I'm doing today. But that's what you will need at a bare minimum. Everything else you can do either with your hands or with things that are around the house. It is highly recommended to get an alignment protractor such as this. If you don't want to purchase one, you can print these off and just print them onto paper and they work fine as well. But this will help us align the cartridge. They also make a version that is a mirrored surface, and I'll show you why that would come in handy in a minute as well. You are also going to need to be able to accurately measure the tracking force of your cartridge, because as we've talked about before, the tracking force is dictated by the cartridge. So for instance, this is an Ortofon OM5E entry-level cartridge. It's a good one. And in order to set the tracking weight, I would need to go on their website or look at the documentation that came with the cartridge to understand what the counterbalance should be set at. And you can obviously set that using the method that we've demonstrated before, and I'll show you again here today how to do it manually. You don't need a scale, but if you do have a scale, you can use that as well. As we get into this, you may be saying to yourself, wow, maybe I don't want to do that. It is a pain. Changing out cartridges is a pain, but when you're demonstrating and talking about every single variable, it sounds like a lot more, but after you've done it a few times, it's something you can do in just a couple of minutes. It's not that big of a deal, but it is tedious. It's not really difficult. It's mostly tedious. So we're going to jump right into it with this. This is the Marley Stir It Up turntable, and like I said before, I've got an Ortofon OM5E on there that for some strange reason I want to change out for this Audio-Technica 3600. Why is that strange? Well, this is actually a lower end turntable or a lower end cartridge compared to what's already on there. But for demonstration purposes, it's going to work perfectly just to show you the process. And I'm also going to show you how to do this on a different type of turntable a little bit later. So stay tuned for that because it is a little bit different approach. And again, you'll see what I mean in a minute. The first thing we want to do is determine whether or not you have a removable head shell. This one does not have a removable head shell. This head shell is fixed to the tone arm. It's non-removable, which means we're going to have to do everything down here at this level. We can't take it off, which would make it a lot easier. So when you have a phono cartridge that is using a fixed head shell like this, you want to start by removing the cartridge itself. Don't take the wires off. You want to start with the cartridge itself. So to begin with, make sure that your stylus guard is on. As you can see, this one is in place, because if not, I guarantee you, you will accidentally bump that and you don't want to damage your stylus. So please remember to put your stylus guard on. Once the stylus guard is on, you can handle this from any direction you want and you're protected, no problem at all. And again, if you've got a fixed head shell, remove the cartridge first. Don't remove the wires first. You'll see why as we go further along. Next thing is, do we need an Allen wrench or a flathead? This one is going to take an Allen wrench. Okay, so what I do is gently grasp the cartridge and then remove the screw itself. These have a nut on the back. As you can see, this one already fell out. If you're lucky, it'll screw right into the cartridge itself, but it's rare to find that type. Some of the Ortofon large body cartridges do that. Most of them just have a simple hole, a simple pass-through. So I'm going to go ahead and raise the tone arm to give us some room. As you can see here, there's just holes, or in this case, little notches where the screws go. And yeah, it's sort of annoying. it's not the easiest thing. So next thing, again, leave this attached. Don't lose the nuts. They it's good to have a set of spare parts. I keep this little set here of spare screws and nuts. You'll notice there's a little notch because putting these on is a lot more difficult than taking them off. So either using a fingernail in that notch to stabilize it as you're threading the screw through the other side, or a screwdriver is very, very helpful. But again, don't lose these. Now, if you're lucky, the cartridge will be color-coded to which wire goes where. As you can see, this one is as well. Most of the time, that is not the case, however. So I always recommend making a little chart, and I orient my chart just like you're looking at the back of this cartridge. So I just take a piece of paper, and it doesn't need to be fancy. It's just a functional thing to help you. Make sure you know which is the top. And we're just going to write on there that the top left was white, the top right was black and green, the bottom left was red, and then the bottom right was black. And then that way, and it might even be a good idea to say this is the OM5E. And that way we know how to wire this guy up. So highly recommended step. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to take these off, put one back on, and I'm like, well, how does this one wired? Because I didn't pay attention to it. So I learned that the hard way. Okay, next step is to actually take the wires off. Okay, so we're going to remove the wires themselves next. I highly, 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 highly recommend that you avoid the temptation to pull these out with your fingers, because I have multiple times just yanked the wire right out of the connector. Then you have to solder it, and that's never fun. So use some needle nose pliers or small pliers. These ones aren't quite needle nose, but they're what I've got. If you don't have the needle nose and you have to remove them, otherwise I would use a flat, very flat object like a screwdriver and just kind of wedge on the back here and kind of wiggle it up and away. As you can see, that was sufficient. Or if you don't even have the flathead screwdriver, your fingernail. But you know what I mean? You would want to get it underneath the edge of the connector and lift up. You would never want to pull on the connector, or even worse, pull on the wire. And you just kind of work your way around, gently doing this. Let me go back to the preferred method. So just gently lift off. You don't want to squeeze too hard, and everything should come off hunky-dory. There's the back of this one. And again, since we've had that guard on, we're good to go. We can safely put it down. Some cartridges also have a removable weight in the top here, as well as a spacer, but I'm not going to get into that too much today. As you can see, this is the OM5E. Great little cartridge, entry-level, elliptical, bonded elliptical, nice little cartridge to have for sure. In reality, you probably wouldn't be replacing it with the Audio-Technica 3600L because this is a lower level cartridge, but it will show you effectively what to do and into the process. That's the main thing here. As you can see, this one also just has passive holes for the screws. This is the hardest part, getting one back on, specifically the screws, putting the screws in. And it's not a problem. Like if you don't like to have the hex screws, you could just replace those for Phillips or flathead, whatever you prefer. In this case, I'm going to keep these. Some cartridges come with their own, not only mounting kits like the screwdriver, the tools, etc. They will also come with their own screws. So there's some options for you there as well. But most of mine cartridges that are in storage would just, be like this with no screws that belong to it, which is why, again, it's handy to have some spares and a little kit. So the first thing you want to do when you are replacing the cartridge into a fixed head shell is basically everything we just did in reverse. So you want to start with the wiring. As you can see, this one is not color coded. If I zoom in, you can see left, right, positive, and then on the bottom is minus. But if you don't know exactly how to wire it, you can always go online and just Google search wiring Audio-Technica 3600L cartridge, and it will show you with the colors, no problem whatsoever. So let me go ahead and connect those wires, and then we'll mount the cartridge. Okay, so as you can see, without a removable head shell, doing it this way where we mount it last gives you a lot of room to operate. So what we're going to do now is just gently connect the wires, and there's little kind of squeeze on attachments at the end of the wires that kind of plug onto these poles. And this method only works for this SME type of cartridge. This will not work for P mount, and no, you can't just arbitrarily replace a ceramic with a magnetic cartridge. It would not work that way. Or if you've got a standard 1/2 inch / SME cartridge that can be adapted and swapped around like this, which the majority of them are, this is the appropriate method. So we're going to, reverse the process. You can use your fingers for this. It's a little bit safer. However, it would be still recommended to use the needle nose. It's a little safer when you're pushing them on to use your fingers than it is pulling them off. But you just gently slide them back on just like that, and you're good to go. It's tedious, you know what I mean? It's not difficult, it's just tedious. But it can be done. 2 to 3 minutes if you've done it a million times and you're just kind of doing it quickly. But that's all there is to it. Now this cartridge is wired up. And now the most difficult and annoying part, and that is actually mounting it. So basically what you're going to want to do is, let's go ahead and pop out these screws. Only do one at a time. Otherwise you'll just accidentally knock one out and it'll go flying, and you don't want to do that. So what we're going to do is just start with one. Some people, because this is difficult, actually put their screws in from the bottom, and that way the hardest part to control is the nut, and that's why they do that. However, I'm going to do it the correct way, quote unquote correct way, and that is to just put the screw in from the top, go through that loop on the cartridge, and then with a little bit of luck, prayer, good feelings, good vibes, and some patience, we'll be able to get this thing on. It is tricky. You kind of need 4 hands to do it properly. So filming this ought to be interesting. You'll also notice that the screw hole on the top of the head shell is a slot, and we'll get to that in a minute. So what we're going to do next is take the nut. Now you'll notice that the nut has a slot on the bottom and it's flat on the top. So we want to keep the flat part on the top facing upward, I should say. And we are going to get the screw lined up, and we're going to try to get under here and essentially position the nut at the bottom of the screw. This is where it gets screwy, if you know what I mean. It gets tricky. And in my experience, just holding your thumb on there sometimes is enough. You take the correct tool on the top and you just rotate it until it catches. Getting it to catch is the trickiest part. And that little notch is really nice. If you are having trouble, you can just stick your thumbnail in that slot, and it helps hold it still enough that you can thread it. Now, don't over tighten it yet. Just kind of get it loose. That actually went pretty well. I'm going to do the same thing to the other side, and I'll be right back. Okay, the worst of it's over. That's always the hardest part. So the wiring is connected properly. We still have the stylus guard on at all times during this process. And these are screwed a little tight, but not totally tight. You want them a little loose because you want to be able to manipulate it within those slots. And I'll show you why in a minute. And, it's okay to leave it at this tightness. You do not need to, or should you crank those down super tight. There's just no need to. And if you're using a fixed head shell like this, these can be made out of plastic or cheap metal. And if you over tighten it, you could chew up the lip inside that slot opening, and that would be a problem. That would be a problem. So now that we've got it on here, the next step is to properly balance it. And I am going to show you the manual way to do it, no tools needed. If you have a dynamometer, or as we call it, a scale, you can do this using this scale. However, you don't need one. That's not required. So I'm just going to show you I'm trying to show you with the least amount of like gadgets and things that are optional as possible, just to show you the bare bones. So the first thing that we're going to do is float the tone arm. Make sure your stylus guard is off at this point, so be careful. And what we're going to do is basically zero out the tone arm. As you can tell now, it's sitting down in the rest. We want it to float. We want it to kind of hover, zero gravity style. And this particular turntable is very difficult to float a tone arm on. I remember that from our review, but just move it out of the rest. And what you want to do, as you can see, there's too much weight in the back, it tilted up. And if there's too much weight forward, it will go down. You don't want either of those. You want it to hover. So we're going to find the 0 point where it just hovers completely neutrally. This is where a good gimbal comes into play. This one does not have a particularly good gimbal. It moves, but it's not like precision by any means. If you're dealing with a higher end turntable with a nice gimbal, you will really feel this is a precision thing, and it floats nicely and you can make minute adjustments. This one's a little more crude, but it still works. So we're going to float the tone arm. That is floated. Then we're going to put it back in the rest to secure it. And we're going to move down here next. So hold the counterbalance itself statically as you rotate the plastic disc on the front. Put that to 0. So now we've calibrated it and we know what 0 is. And all we have to do at this point is rotate the entire thing. As you can see, the plastic moves freely with the actual weight if we're not holding it separately. And if we rotate it clockwise, it adds weight. As you can see on the scale there, you can precisely read how much weight is going on. So we start at 0, and this is where the information comes in handy. In fact, it's not just handy, it's a necessity as to what tracking force this cartridge requires. This is the Audio-Technica 3600L. It has a range, and that range will allow us to set it anywhere from about 2.5 to 4. So in this case, I'm going to set it to 3. So there's 1 gram, 2 grams, and then this will be 3 grams. And it's okay that it says 0 because we know that, that's next in line, 2, 2.5, and 3. So our tone arm is set, the weight is set, it's perfectly calibrated in terms of tracking force. Next thing is cartridge alignment. For this, you will need your protractor. If you don't have a protractor or you don't want to get this detailed, this is where I'm going to catch some hate on this. So this is my opinion. This is my experience and my opinion. If you don't want to proceed with proper cartridge alignment, you can choose to align it in terms of the left and right positioning of it by moving it back and forth like this, so that the flat front edge of the cartridge is in alignment with the flat front edge of the head shell. As you can see, that's the way it's set right now. That is not the most accurate way. That is not the quote unquote correct way to do it, but it will probably get you by. If you want to take it a step further, which is recommended, you'll want to use the protractor. And it's pretty simple. You'll see that there's 2 square or rectangular areas here with these crosshatch markings. And essentially, you position, turntable has to be off, of course, position the head shell and the cartridge over the top of the little X in the middle, and then look from the top down to make sure that it's aligned properly. And then you actually lower the tone arm down so that the needle touches right on that crosshatch marking. And then looking top down, you make the adjustments in terms of the left and right movements, gently adjusting until you get it exactly aligned at this position. And once you have it aligned at this position, see it's a little bit inward there. Okay, let's say that's perfectly aligned. Then you move on and do the same thing over here. The reason why there's two crosshatch areas on the alignment protractors is because you need to align it both here and then here as well. Those two positions, if you align it in both of those, and it should allow you almost exactly to line it up for both. There'll be a tiny variation. It won't be 100% perfect, but if you do the best average between those two, that will be perfect alignment of that cartridge in terms of its left to right positioning. The reason why you have to do it this way is that this tone arm pivots. It's rotating, and it's the tracking angle, which is what we're setting here, is never exactly the same from start to finish. It's pivoting. And because of that pivot, we have to take two average points, and that's where it comes. If you have a linear tracking turntable, that's why they have linear tracking turntables, because they don't have that. Did you notice how this big overhanging head shell made it somewhat difficult to align? Well, you weren't alone, and that is why there are other types of alignment protractors, such as this mirrored finish one. The mirrored finish one will allow us to do the same exact thing, but be able to look in the mirrored reflection and use that mirrored reflection to help us align that cartridge. There's another thing to consider, and that is called overhang, and that's the forward to back position of the cartridge. I'm not going to go into that here, but if you really want to get into the weeds on this, there is a proper forward and back position or overhang position that you can set as well. Next thing we want to look at is what's called the vertical tracking angle, or the VTA, and basically that is the angle that the tone arm is at when the record is playing. When the tone arm is on a record and the record is spinning, you want your tone arm to be completely parallel with the record itself. And as you can see, this tone arm right here is lower, a little bit lower in the back than it is the front. The reason why is I've got a thick shellac record on here right now. If we put a vinyl record on here, it would be just about perfectly parallel. That would be fine. Some higher end turntables, you can adjust the up and down to the VTA positioning of the tone arm so that it is parallel to the record surface. Something to be aware of is the cartridge height. That is the distance from the record surface to the top of the head shell. Some cartridges are taller than other cartridges, and you want to make sure that it's going to be a fit. So if it's too tall, the cartridge can throw off the VTA tracking angle. And again, that impacts how that needle is riding in the groove. It'll still work, especially with this variance is very minimal on this one. This is not a problem really. But ideally, you want that tone arm horizontal with the record surface or the platter surface as well. Important to always test this with an actual record on here, because if we took the record off and put the stylus on the platter mat, it wouldn't give us an accurate representation. It would look like it was too short here and too high in the back, because the record itself needs to be accounted for. Something to be aware of. Most cartridges are very close in vertical size, but it's something to be aware. I've ran into it once in 5 years where I put I think it was the LP7. I put a cartridge on the LP7 and it was too tall. I think it was a Grado. The Grados are a bit tall. I put the Grado Prestige Gold on there and it was a little too tall, but that one had a VTA adjustment. I was able to adjust the tone arm and get this part horizontal. Also in the weeds is this little device right here, this alignment block. This allows you to see the horizontal tracking angle, basically if it's left or right in terms of tilting down to the right or down to the left. And there's not as much adjustment that you can do in terms of this, because let's say it's, you know, kilted to this side. Let's say it's tilted down like this. You know, you may be able to tighten this screw or loosen this one, make little adjustments here, and there's a little finite adjustments. Again, you want to do this with the record on as well. but this exists as well if you really want to get into it. As far as I'm concerned, though, what we have right now, what we've done, what we've set, the level of granularity has resulted in a perfectly swapped cartridge. This thing is ready to play. When you plug it in, if it sounds horribly wrong, it's probably the wires got attached in the wrong order. And you can get back there and make those adjustments to those wires without redoing all of that. It's just a little more tricky now that it's mounted. Now, I purposely did all of that on a turntable with a fixed head shell that was rather inconvenient, just to show you the worst case scenario and to make you appreciate how wonderful a removable head shell is. Because all we have to do with a removable head shell, as is the case with this beautiful Fluence RT85N, is unscrew it and remove it. And now look how easy it is to get to everything from the screws to the wiring. We can do all of that difficult work without having to break our neck and work in these very confined spaces. It's a lot easier. It is a lot easier. As you can see how this cartridge isn't perfectly lined up with the head shell. That's because when aligning with the protractor, I made an adjustment to make sure that that tracking angle was perfect. So what's really cool is with these removable head shells is you get a few of these and they're not expensive, the head shells themselves. You can load up 2 or 3 cartridges, and when you want to replace your cartridge, all you have to do is unscrew it and put on the one you want, reattach it, make sure you adjust the tracking weight, but the alignment will be set. All you have to do is reset the tracking weight for whatever cartridge you put on, and you're good to go. Easy as that. Now you can see what I was saying. It's not really difficult. It's very tedious. It's not something I enjoy doing unless I really need to, but it can be done. It's very much a user serviceable part and something that a pre-aligned cartridge from the factory, you appreciate that more once you've manually done it. All right, my friends, and that's going to do it for today. Thank you so much for watching. As always, a thumbs up would be appreciated. Share this out. Tell your friends. Make sure you're subscribed. I've still got turntables to give away, so you're going to want to stay tuned for when we go live in the near future. We've got some fun stuff planned that you're not going to want to miss. But for now, that is going to do it. So, happy record hunting, and we'll see you next time.